Okay, we'll get started. So, hi everybody. On behalf of the University of Helsinki, I'd like to welcome you to our first US Alumni and Friends Network event, organized in collaboration with the Fulbright Finland Foundation and the Embassy of Finland in Washington, DC. My name is Adam Pratchett. I'm a liaison manager at the University of Helsinki, and I'll be moderating today's event for you. This event is designed to be the kickoff for our Alumni and Friends Network in the United States and our wider global engagement work. It's also an opportunity for you to hear from some top speakers related to education development and to meet fellow alumni and friends of the university based in the United States. With this in mind, I'd like to thank our speakers for their participation in today's event and our event partners for their support. I said that today is the first event for the university's US and Alumni Friends Network, although for those of you who've been connected to the university for a number of years, you will know that we have previously organized some events in the US prior to COVID-19. As a university, we're now strategically focused on global engagement, and as we emerge into the post-COVID world, today's event will hopefully be the first of many that we organize for our US Alumni and Friends Network. Just a small note to say this event is being recorded and the recording will be made available after the event and shared with you. We deliberately decided to make today's event a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar, so you have a chance to see other members of the network. So with this in mind, you're welcome to have your camera on or off whenever you prefer, but I kindly ask you to keep your microphones off for the duration of the event, just so everyone can clearly hear the speakers. Just to go over the general plan very quickly for today's event, over the next hour and a half, we've got a great lineup of speakers for you, focusing on the topic of education development. We'll shortly have a number of opening remarks from my colleagues at the university and also our event partners, the Fulbright Finland Foundation and the Embassy of Finland in Washington, DC. After this, we'll move on to the main body of the event with Professor Auli Toom from the University of Helsinki and Professor Thomas Hatch from Columbia University, talking about education development, where you'll also have the opportunity to pose any questions or comments to them. We really want today to be an interactive event and for you to be able to ask questions and share your experience. So I'd strongly encourage you to join the discussion in the chat, introduce yourself perhaps, write your questions or comments, and we'll do our best to put them to our speakers. Finally, if you'd like to share your thoughts about today's event on social media, please make sure to tag the University of Helsinki and use the hashtag Helsinki Alumni. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to my colleague Tina, who will briefly tell you about the university's global engagement work and our vision and plans for the US Alumni and Friends Network. So Tina, thanks so much for organizing today's event. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam, and welcome also on my behalf. So my name is Tina Naskali. I'm working as a liaison manager for alumni and stakeholder relations and especially responsible for the international alumni and stakeholder relations at the University of Helsinki. And I'm also very excited of this event we have together done and planned with FulbrighFinland Foundation, Embassy of Finland in Washington, DC. I would just shortly show you a few slides so that you don't only have to listen to me, but you also have the visuality where you can see how our brand looks. So we are now, as Adam mentioned, in a kind of kickoff for our US Alumni and Friends network. We are all together in our alumni network, over 45,000, and we basically are the largest professional network in Finland. We have our graduates, exchange students, our previous and current employees, and for example, now we have also our Fulbrighters, who we consider as our staff alumni or graduates. So we are warmly welcoming everybody to the network of alumni, but the Friends zone and Friends network is important for us as well. We see the value in strategic partnerships, and partnerships can be only done so that we actually invite all the interested in the cooperation and ideation of potential new solutions for sustainability of future, better education, better research cooperation. That's the grounds for Alumni and Friends Network. Here, just few notions on the kind of different angles to our cooperation. Want to mention also that you will get these introductory slides we have today afterwards in our email communication, don't worry. Continuous education is actually one of the cornerstones of our Helsinki alumni work, and that is nicely linked also to today's topic of educational development as a whole. We want to also better understand the local situation, the environment we are working in different parts of the world, and that's where you, our alumni and friends, are in a key position for making us to discuss on the topic and making us to understand better how things function in different parts, and we are able to strengthen the collaboration between US and Finland. As what comes to the international work that we have so far done, especially now in this alumni work, naturally we have educational and research cooperation in all parts of the world. And that is something that is all the time strengthened and kind of built up to be even better, more impactful. But we have, as a university, the knowledge that our stakeholder relation network is very important in order for us to be as a whole kind of impactful player in the scale of the universities, but also from the community point of view. Here you can see the world map. So far, we have been working quite heavily on the European scale, closer to us, also in China. As Anna mentioned, there have been certain events in the US, but now we are wanting to build this University of Helsinki USA Alumni Friends network together with you. And why you see this East Coast and West Coast mention is that, as we all understand, practicalities like the time zones among Europe and also different parts of the US effect of this kind of events, how people are able to engage and participate for the interesting topics. That's also the one reason why we today have a recording. So we want to engage our alumni, even though they are not able to be with us today, but they will in the future understand what we have been discussing and be inspired as well. Just a few final words. Next year, we are going to have several different types of activities in our US context. We are very happy to tell you about this, to meet you online and on site in our events and activities, and learn from your expectations, your ideas, and needs as well, based on what kind of background, organization, or situation you may have at the work life or studies. We also will have a more relaxed alumni gathering still in the December, where we are going to reflect all the events we have had this year. But these things you will find in the slides, and I would just kind of like to end saying that you are able to reach us to alumni@helsinki.fi address easily. So all our alumni and friends are able to contact us through that, ask questions, give comments and ideas. And together we actually can make and create a better international impact. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Tina, for your time. I think, as you mentioned, we're really keen to engage our alumni and friends in the US. And there are so many ways for those of you watching to keep up to date with the latest news at the university. And of course, if you have any questions, you have some ideas, or you'd like to have a chat, you're more than welcome to contact our alumni team directly using the email address that's just been posted into the chat. So we look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you. So we'll now move on to three short welcome introductions from the university and our event partners before we move on to the main body of the event. So to deliver the welcome address on behalf of the University of Helsinki, I'm delighted to be joined by the rector of the university, Sari Lindblom. Sari, thanks so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear University of Helsinki alumni, Finnish Embassy and FulbrighFinland Foundation representatives, our partners and stakeholders, dear all. I am Sari Lindblom, as Adam mentioned, and I'm the rector of the University of Helsinki, and it is my great pleasure to be here today and have an opportunity to meet you all, this time still in an online environment. Today we discuss a topic which is in the core of my own research and central to my work at the university, namely education development, its opportunities and challenges. I am a psychologist and professor of higher education, and my own research has focused on learning and teaching at university. The existing and future potential of partnerships and cooperation is very important to explore, strengthen, and further develop. As rector, I have an opportunity to work closely on universities' development with the support of our most brilliant academics, our supporting staff, our students, who are the future talents and who will hopefully save the whole world by solving big global problems. The university's values, truth, Bildung, freedom, and inclusivity constitute the foundation of our operations and interaction, and will also guide our choices and reforms. During the past 1.5 years, we have all taken a very large digital leap and have been forced to react on external demands. In any situation, however, it is crucial to continue educating experts to the different fields of the society, to enhance the research on the quality of teaching and learning, and in this way to ensure that education will stay as one of the basic pillars of the society. The university's strength lies in the continuous development of academic thinking and research skills. The solid link between research and teaching guarantees the high quality of learning. As a university, our responsibility does not end when the student graduates. We understand our important role in continuous education. University of Helsinki Alumni Network is one of the key elements which helps us to keep in contact with our alumni. We have an opportunity to develop and offer interesting lifelong learning opportunities for our alumni network and strengthen the dialogue with our stakeholders more widely. I am very happy to see you all today online in this first wider University of Helsinki event for our USA Alumni and Friends network. I hope we will keep in contact also in the future. We are more than happy to hear your thoughts and ideas on how we could together inspire our network and facilitate further planning of cooperation, online and in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sari, and for joining us, of course, today. The next speaker for today's event is Petri Koikkalainen, who is the Counselor for Education and Science at the Finnish Embassy in Washington, D.C. So, Petri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam, and good morning, United States. Good afternoon, Finland, and greetings from the Embassy of Finland in Washington, D.C. I'm sitting in the library of the building, as you can probably see. And thank you, Tina and Adam, for the organization of this event, which takes place on 2 continents, which is not actually so easy. I have a couple of slides which I'm trying to share with you. Hope it works. Looks quite okay for the moment anyway. I'm not on the first slide, but now I should be. This is kind of a my contact information, and in a way the key point even in my presentation. I want to give you my virtual business card, so to speak, which means that if you need the Embassy of Finland for anything related to science or higher education, or the research collaboration between Finland and United States, I will be your contact person for the next 5 years. I have a pretty long appointment here. I'm not a career diplomat, and that's why I can have such a long appointment. I have a university background. I'm a political scientist. I have worked at the University of Tampere, then for almost 20 years at the University of Lapland. Prior to this assignment, I have been lecturer of political science, associate professor for a while. I have a couple of research visits to United States, University of California, Berkeley and Davis are the two campuses that are most familiar to me. I can perhaps also say a couple of words of science diplomacy. I'm really new in the field. I only started in DC on 11th of October, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, so I'm still learning, but I will have plenty of time. But science diplomacy, to put it very briefly, is about finding out what happens in the United States in research and higher education, and then based on that knowledge, trying to build networks between researchers and help mobility of both researchers and university students. That's how I see science diplomacy very briefly at the moment. How we do it in Finland, we have a pretty new network called Team Finland Knowledge, which is a global network, and it's actually the first attempt that we have in this scale to do international and global science diplomacy. I have 7 colleagues around the world in Abu Dhabi, Beijing, Buenos Aires, Moscow, New Delhi, Pretoria, and Singapore. Some of these posts are more regional, like Gulf of Persia, Latin America, Southern Africa, Southeast Asia. I have the United States and Canada to some extent in my portfolio, but currently we are more concentrating on the United States. There's a lot of things to do here. It's a big country with lots of opportunities and increasing opportunities if the science funding plans, the budget proposals are going to proceed as they have been proposed by the current administration. In the Embassy of Finland in the Washington, D.C., I'm placed in a team which is called Section of Sustainable Growth and Commerce. We are 7 people. I am the science and education person in that team. The other people are concentrated on green economy, technology and digitalization, trade policy in a more traditional sense. But I try to make sure that everything that we do would include a research and possibly a higher education angle. The team has a rather broad definition of priorities and goals. It comes basically from the Finnish government program with emphasis on democracy, rule of law, human rights, and then a little bit more specifically, climate change and technological development, and further operationalized in areas like green economy, climate action, the Arctic, technology, science, finance, leveling the global playing field, and then promoting trade, of course. But for me, it means finding common ground between Finnish and US priorities in research and higher education, and then creating opportunities for collaboration and mobility. Some of our ongoing activities, this is only a small portion, of course, of what's happening between Finland and the United States by way of research cooperation and mobility. One example, a pretty important ongoing project is the partnership programs between the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, a bilateral research grant programs, which enables Finnish and American research to work in joint projects, not only applying money on their own sides and then hoping that they would somehow be coordinated. There are risks. Of course, opportunities also in that kind of cooperation, but this is kind of more coordinated than just relying on the local sources. We are trying to proceed on that road whenever possible. We have some important state level collaborations going on. We have memorandums of understanding between Finland and Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, and Washington State on the broad themes that I just described. We are talking with Colorado at the moment, hoping to proceed there. Then, of course, regarding mobility, research and student mobility are our priority. The embassies can hopefully do something with the visa problems and etc. The practical aspects of mobility. FulbrighFinland Foundation is a key partner in that respect. and any other business related to the advancement of Finnish-American collaboration in science and higher education. Thank you. I think I have used my time. Over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Petri, and of course for the support of the embassy in organising this event. It's been really great to have you on board for this. The final of our kind of opening welcome speeches is from Terhi Mölsä, who is the CEO of the Fulbright Finland Foundation. Terhi, thank you again for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am really delighted to be here with you. Within a big or small group, the power of bringing people together in a collaborative environment is enormous. And at the Fulbright Finland Foundation, it is our privilege to help do just that. 1/4 of the American University of Helsinki alumni registered for this event are also our foundation's alumni. But for the benefit of those who are not, well, perhaps I should say yet our grantees and alumni, I'll introduce us first with just a couple of words. We are a private Finnish foundation with a very unique history based on a governmental agreement between Finland and the US. We've been around since 1949, funding and managing international exchanges, and the best known of our programs is Fulbright. But it's important to note that the scope of our work goes beyond the grants and mobility programs. For instance, we have a special task to help advance internationalization of Finnish higher education and research, and to help Finnish and US institutions create linkages. Just last week, we hosted a higher education delegation from the state of Minnesota at our foundation. And we're continuing to work with them to help in their efforts in creating more collaboration with Finland and Finnish institutions. In all of our grant programs, the grant term is a gateway to a long-term engagement as alumni. Since the inception of our programs in 1949, we've had over 2,000 American alumni. And for everyone attending this event here today, it might be interesting for you to know that over 1/4 of those were hosted on their Fulbrights at the University of Helsinki. Today's expert speaker, Thomas Hatch, among them. During this current academic year, there are 14 American Fulbrighters at the University of Helsinki, and I think we may have one of them here online with us too. We are currently in contact with as many as 770 US alumni in our Friends of Fulbright Finland network in the United States. And it's not only about being in contact with them, they're absolutely crucial to our work. They serve as field-specific experts in academic peer reviews, provide professional consultation in their area of expertise, help fund our grants by donating and by advocating for funding for our programs, provide a welcome network in the US for our outbound Finnish grantees, and serve in so many other critical capacities. They receive a regular newsletter from us soliciting for their input and sharing news about opportunities for them, including events in the United States. And hopefully we will soon get back to doing in-person events again. And our US Alumni Council and other alumni volunteers in the US are working closely with our office to develop the opportunities for engagement in the US. The next newsletter will go out tomorrow, Wednesday. But one of the key messages here today is that Fulbright Finland is an inclusive network. There are opportunities and ways for everyone to participate and be engaged, so you do not have to be our grantee or alumni. I'll give you a couple of examples just so you get the idea. But I do want to start from this question. As alumni of the University of Helsinki, do you have plans to come back to Finland to continue your collaboration? If so, consider doing that on a Fulbright. Or maybe you wish to invite your Finnish contacts to the US on academic or professional projects. They may be able to do that on our foundation's grants. You may also be interested in our public online events. Last year, for example, we organized a global 10-part webinar series addressing higher education exchanges in the COVID-19 era, and we had participants from 67 countries attending. This coming spring 2022, we're organizing our annual Fulbright Forum online with 11 sessions on separate days, each on a specific theme. We'd love to see you there. And there's more examples. So please do take a look at our website and consider following us on social media or subscribe to our general news update. One of the things we try to do is to provide opportunities for our alumni to connect with each other and with other groups and institutions of interest. And just like everything else our foundation does, we do that together with our partners and friends. Today's event is a great example of that. And I want to sincerely thank the University of Helsinki for the opportunity to join you today, and the Finnish Embassy in Washington, D.C. for our long-term and absolutely wonderful collaboration. I started out my remarks by noting the enormous power of bringing people together in a collaborative environment. And I want to add that the unique beauty of that is that you can never know in advance what exactly will come out of it. It is so gratifying to witness two scientists from the same field who previously did not know each other to strike up a conversation in our alumni event. And by the end of the evening, hear them discuss a joint research grant proposal. Or two professionals from completely different fields whose alumni event conversation leads to a realization that there is an intersection in their work that lends itself to a joint business venture. Or the delightful personal encounters like last week with our Minnesota delegation, where in a casual conversation, it turned out that one of our current American Fulbrighters was that little kid living a block away from one of the Minnesota delegates. And they next meet 20 years later in Helsinki. In the end, it is all about people. We want to help provide opportunities for meaningful connections between people. And with this event too, I hope we plant seeds for things to come. We may not know exactly right now what they will be, but I know they'll be there. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you so much for your speech, Terhi, and of course for the support of the Fulbright Finland Foundation. I must say I've had the pleasure to meet and work with some Fulbright scholars at the university, and they really are outstanding students and researchers. So I very much hope to those Fulbright scholars who are watching now that we can continue to engage you after you finish your studies with us. So that concludes the first part of today's event. So I'd like to very quickly just thank our three speakers and their organizations for participating, and we very much appreciate it. And we'll now move on to the main body of today's event, which is a panel discussion focused on education development. So with that in mind, I'll hand over the reins to Tina, who will guide you through this part of the event. So Tina, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for the inspirational talks you had and greetings. Exactly to the point of today's topic as well, about learning from each other, building networks, and finding new ways to cooperate. Yeah, as we all know, higher education institutions, they have certain kind of pillars that are seen. Mainly it is discussed that research and education are the main pillars, but then today's event is a good example of that third pillar, as we call it here at the University of Helsinki, which is kind of the togetherness and the relations, community relations, building partnerships, building cooperation. So that is the kind of triangle we are working with at the universities and other higher education institutions. From our perspective at the University of Helsinki, the research-based education is a central cornerstone. Finland, in many places, also in the US, is generally known from a field like teacher education, school curricular work of education pedagogics, and also some technology development. In the US, then again, the scale is vaster than what we have here in Finland. And also, Petri, you were pointing on a certain amount of, it's so versatile, the grounds that you have in the US. It is a vast country. And there the importance comes to understand the differences, but also understand what kind of opportunities is actually built for cooperation, what we can learn from each other, and what we can bring also for the education in order to be better together in the future. The special time of pandemics, which we have now lived almost 2 years, it has shown that education is the kind of topic which interests everybody in the community, whether they have children, whether they are children, or not. It is a question of self-development, continuous education, lifelong learning. And that is actually a cornerstone also in the work of Helsinki Alumni, as I mentioned in the beginning. We want to support the continuous education and the learning process for the whole life of our alumni and friends network. Then there are also questions in the current news in all the countries. What is the role of research? Can the research be trusted? How the education is developing? Are we able to tackle the challenges, for example, of the pandemic area? And then now we are talking about hybrid world. What does it mean in this context? We want to highlight the importance of the discussion and all these questions in the mind of education development. The research on this topic in the international scale is something that we need to enhance and find further perspectives and cooperation opportunities in order to have the better and more vaster, larger impact. This is one of the reasons why we are now here. We have here together with us professors Thomas Hatch from Columbia University, as mentioned by Terhi, our Fulbrighters as well. And this way we could call not only friends of the University of Helsinki, but friends of Finland. And also you have a good understanding on both sides. Then we also have Professor Auli Toom from the University of Helsinki. And Auli has been working and is still currently working also in the international environment. So exactly on the point of international cooperation and learning from different cultures and contexts. So at this point, I would just like to point out the main topic of today. We are talking about the role of university research and pedagogy understanding have in educational development. And also we are kind of taking a small step toward the kind of discussion on the technological point of view of education and how this all affects on equality of education. And does it actually help to strengthen or not the social justice in different environments? Our topic for the panel discussion is developing education, how to create more powerful and equitable schools and education systems in the future. But I think that now, without further speech, I would like to introduce to our first panelist, Professor Thomas Hatch. As Adam also mentioned earlier, Thomas Hatch is a professor, teaches colleagues at Columbia University. He's also a director of the National Center for Restructuring Education, Schools and Teaching, called NCREST, how you pronounce it. The research of Thomas includes studies of schools improvement efforts at the school, district and national levels. Thomas is also known as from the book that he has been involved called The Education We Need for a Future We Can't Predict. I think this is very, very current at this today's world and this past 2 years. The book focuses on, and the topic that Thomas has focuses on efforts to create more powerful learning experiences, both inside and outside schools in developed and developing context. We will hear a short introduction from Thomas now for this discussion and your background. Please do.
Thank you so much, Tina, and thank you, Adam, and everyone for organizing this panel. I'm just going to share my screen and start a few comments here. There we go. And as Tina said, these comments I'm drawing from my most recent book, and I want to stress that I couldn't possibly have written that book without the cooperation of colleagues from the University of Helsinki, including Auli and others, as well as from my Fulbright experiences back in Norway 10 years ago. So the Fulbright and Finland experience has been absolutely crucial to my own personal and professional development. But as Terry gave a nice introduction, sort of talking about the unpredictability of the future and what might happen, and emphasize some of the positive things that might happen in the future. I think over the past year, we've also gotten a sense of some of the ways in which the changes in the world that we haven't been able to predict can also create considerable challenges. But my book really takes the perspective that because the world is so unpredictable and because it's changing all the time, we need an education that prepares our students for that unpredictability and to adapt to those changes. But despite the fact that I think that's a crucial goal for education, the reality is that many aspects of schools and school systems aren't changing much at all. And that creates considerable challenges. And I also want to highlight that even in the systems that have changed somewhat, and we consider higher performing, and that includes Finland and places like Singapore, even in those systems that are higher performing, we've seen that it's very difficult to change those systems. And that in of itself has created problems, as it's made it very difficult to shift to focus on 21st century skills and things like that. One of the poll answers that folks highlighted was the importance of employability, and yet systems like Singapore and Finland are trying to make changes to prepare students for the future world of work, and it's very challenging to do that. Part of what I address in the book is I try to draw lessons from really many of the challenges, and I would say failures, of large-scale school reform efforts, not just in the US, but many places around the world. And I've tried to draw some lessons so that we can learn from, in fact, why we failed to improve schools, to then think about what we can do in the future to make sure that they actually are making changes in the directions that would help us. And I've addressed a number of principles that of school improvement that I highlight in the book. And one of the first is to recognize that even though it doesn't look like schools are changing that much, they do change, but they change slowly and they change incrementally over long periods of time. So that's a slightly more positive spin on things. But the reality is, because it changes so slowly, the more radical changes are, the less likely they are to spread on a large scale. And for those of us who are concerned about the academic pressure and the narrowness of the curriculum, and believe that we really need to embrace a much wider set of abilities, the inability to make these radical changes is a critical issue. But part of what I argue about in the book, and I try to illustrate, is that there are places, what I call niches of possibility, where the conditions are actually more amenable for changing schools, and where we can create a foundation for transforming schooling into the future. And these niches of possibility, you can find them in all systems. I've found them in South Africa, in Liberia, in Finland, in the US, other parts of the world. But I consider these to be sometimes alternative schools or alternative classrooms. They might be in interdisciplinary courses or science labs. They might be in museums or other places, after school programs outside of schools. These are places all around the world that have really demonstrated that it's possible to create more powerful learning experiences that support the development of all aspects of our students and can prepare them more powerfully for the future. But part of the problem that's holding us back are not only the institutional problems, but they're also, in a way, the conceptual problems, the ways we think about education. And in many ways, we've treated education as if it's synonymous with schooling and focused almost exclusively on preparing students for college. And the reality is, my argument is, that we need to embrace all the opportunities to support the development of the whole child for the whole day, for their whole lives. Now, this is easy to say. It's very complicated and difficult to do. But what I go on to argue in the book is that, building on what we've learned about how hard it is to change schools, we can use that knowledge to make the schools we have right now more efficient, more effective, and crucially, much more equitable right now. But at the same time, we know that the education systems we have are not adequate to the challenges of the future or to creating the kind of equitable system we need. And that means we need, over the long term, to really be rethinking what we mean by education, and we need to be collectively developing the common understanding and collective responsibility that can really fuel the social movements that can focus on issues like equity and that can transform society and education in the future. And I've really made the argument that creating a more equitable and powerful education is a challenge just like addressing the climate emergency. And just like we need a social movement to address the climate emergency, we need a social movement to rethink education and schooling and create the education we need for a future we can't predict. So thank you, Tina.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And that was a very good insight actually to our discussion topic, and very different kind of viewpoints included there in your introduction. Thank you for that. At this point, let's move. And I would like to introduce you Professor Auli Toom, so Professor of Higher Education and Director of the Center for University Teaching and Learning at University of Helsinki. Auli is also the visiting professor at the University of Tartu, Estonia. The research Auli Toom does include teacher knowing, competence, expertise and agency among students and teachers. Auli investigates with the group these factors in basic education, teacher education, and higher education context. She leads several research projects on higher education and teacher education. So please tell us a bit of your viewpoints to today's topic, Auli.
Yes, thank you, Tina, for the introduction, and also thank you very much for inviting me to this event as well, and welcome all participants from my part as well to join the event and hopefully also to discussion later. As you can see, my title and perspective to today's discussion is that how do we promote equity and avoid inequity through education. And my short talk is related to my research that I am doing at the moment in our Pioneer project, pioneering policies and practices tackling educational inequalities in Europe. It is funded by EU Horizon 2020 funding scheme and done in collaboration with 13 research teams from 9 European countries and with 3.5 million euro budget. And as we all know, based on several earlier studies, good education provides access to labor market, offers the chance of political participation, and improves overall well-being, health, and life expectancy. However, we know that educational inequalities still remain surprisingly deeply ingrained into many European education systems and even beyond. And it has been even found that educational institutions, educational practices, and educational trajectories increase educational inequalities. This is actually a quite recent research finding of one of my colleagues at University of Helsinki, and quite concerning. So it is necessary to promote educational equality in Europe and all around the world. And of course, we as researchers think that how it is best done is that we provide research-informed policy recommendations and identify pioneering policies and practices to enhance access, uptake, and completion of education in various levels. I think that it is important to realize that equal education systems play a very significant role in making societies more inclusive and accessible to all. And we can even say that educational systems are the most powerful societal interventions to individuals' life. And a profound reduction in educational inequalities would raise the educational levels of individuals belonging to disadvantaged groups and society as a whole. And for these reasons, taking steps to increase educational equality is crucial for improving individual life chances and the overall socio-economic and political sustainability of Europe and beyond. And we all know that equality and equity have been the key topics in Finnish education, and this is also a current concern of Finnish researchers, what we are doing and emphasizing here. And we know that factors such as social background, gender, disability, or immigration history still continue to influence achievement at different education stages. And for these reasons, special attention needs to be paid to these issues and educational practices and policies related to them. We further know, based on research, that educational inequalities are tricky and really difficult to tackle and grasp since they develop through complex dynamics between contextual and individual factors throughout individuals' lives. Individual differences in the uptake of education are hardly explained by a learner's talent and effort, but they are rather structured by characteristics such as gender, social and ethnic background, and their interplay. And the mechanisms behind these educational inequalities relate to several systemic levels, the macro level of society, the meso level of institutions, and the individual micro level of students and pupils. And for these reasons, research and recommendations in shaping the future of educational systems and societies are needed to make them more inclusive, more innovative and reflective, as also Tom emphasized in his talk. And for these, we need research-based efforts, and not only in Europe, but all around the world. And to address the educational disparities, this is what our pioneered Horizon 2020 project focuses on, both in formal and informal educational settings. And because of the challenges related to educational inequalities and the tricky ways in how they build and develop, we have the systemic design also in our research. So we focus on educational policies, educational institutions in various levels of educational systems, meaning from early childhood and care, even to higher education and beyond, and on individual children, students, teachers, and parents level. And our particular focus is on the specific disadvantages at intersecting axes of inequality, because we know that educational inequalities are particularly pronounced at these intersections. And our research focuses on scrutinizing student trajectories to formulate innovative and efficient tools to tackle these inequalities. And through the project, we aim at providing policy and practice recommendations to counteract educational disparities at different stages of education, and especially developing an innovative methodological research or framework, analyze how national or regional policies address the questions related to inequalities and vulnerable groups. We use big data sets, for example, PISA and other already collected data sets to identify intersectional inequalities throughout educational trajectories and paths, and also conduct practical practice-related research, both in formal and informal educational settings. And this is done in collaboration with 13 multidisciplinary research teams from 9 European countries that have been identified as being very different in terms of educational equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auli. And before we actually continue for the actual panel discussion, I would like to, as a kind of reminder, just show you visually also our discussion topic of developing education. What will it take to create more powerful and equitable schools and education systems in the future? And if you are actually using, for example, Twitter, as a reminder here that we have also our speakers, Thomas and Auli in Twitter. So these are something that you may use in the discussion. And of course, with that hashtag Helsinki Alumni as well, which Adam pointed out in the beginning. But without further speech, thank you first of all for the viewpoints, both Thomas and Auli. And I would like to remind all participants that you are now able to use the chat for any comments and questions to our speakers during our discussion, so feel free to do so. I think that our topic is very powerful as it is and quite wide, as we already now saw from the perspectives that you brought up. When we actually consider that we talk about kind of powerful and scaled form of education, and at the same time about social justice and equality, so as we can call a bit more softer values, do you see that there's some contradiction? Are we able to have these side by side? So do we have more the opportunities or challenges? For example, Auli, you pointed out the building equity and kind of overall socioeconomic sustainability point of view there. How do you feel?
Yes, that's actually a very good question. So how to, because for me, it is about question, or it relates to the things that how much we prepare children and students to the needs of the current and future society, as Tom has been emphasizing in the book, and make them resilient, for example, resilient enough to be good enough in the competition and the requirements set for them. And are we able to do it in a very inclusive way and in a soft way, and allow them the freedom of being children and freedom of being interested whatever they are interested in, and have the freedom to focus on such things in school and later in university or wherever they want to go, that they are interested in. So I think that you put quite interesting and challenging question for us into the beginning. But I think that following or thinking about or reflecting on how we have been able to do it in Finland, so I could still claim that it is possible. It requires efforts, it requires resources, it requires a strong political will and vision how to build a same and inclusive school for all, and how to provide equal educational opportunities for all. But from our perspective, I think that it is possible.
Yeah, and I would just pick up on that, what Auli was saying. It's part of the problem is we try to do everything in a very short period of time. And that's why I was emphasizing the need to rethink education and schooling. If we think of preparation for work as continuing on beyond school and supporting lifelong learning, then that creates more time and space in the earlier years to support, time for play, for developing student agency, for supporting social and emotional skills. But in the US in particular, that has not been the perspective. The perspective is that you need to prepare students for work so when they graduate from college, they're ready to go. So we really need to transform that sense.
Thank you. And I think that was a very good point you brought up there in the end, Thomas, about the kind of perspective differences. As we are talking about the kind of US context and then again Finnish context. In addition, what you mentioned, that is there some key element that you see that from each other we could learn? Some specific kind of viewpoints.
Well, I just want to really highlight and pick up on what Auli was saying in terms of her presentation, that addressing issues of educational equity, on the one hand, it really takes a commitment and a development of a set of values of social justice. That's why I talked about the need for a climate change like social movement that really brings all of us together to fight for equity and social justice. But that has to be accompanied by very specific tools and resources that help. For example, in her instance, she talked about the challenges that male migrant working class students might face in schools. The general commitment to equity is not going to help them unless we specifically know how to create educational experiences that enable them to learn as powerfully and as effectively as their peers. So I talk about the need for micro innovations. These are, in schools and classrooms, in very specific contexts for different groups of students that help them to learn in much more powerful ways.
Yes, thank you. And actually, linked to that regarding the versatile background of students as well, Auli, as you are also researching kind of the teacher side of the story, as we could say, we've had one of pre-question, which was more linked to the kind of diversity of the teachers and how that could be enhanced, that whether it's of a cultural background of taking up minorities in question. Have you found out in the research that you have done, or also, of course, then Thomas, how could this be supported, that we actually take into account not just among the students, but also the teachers, that they would kind of have a role models?
Yes, what came into my mind related to this, that if I think especially Finland and how we are benefiting or have been benefiting about international experience and international research and examples, because it is, I think that we are moving towards taking these issues more seriously into account in our schools and in our teacher education and in our higher education. We have constant discussions related to them, especially in higher education at the moment. So what we can learn from our researcher colleagues in the US or in Sweden, for example, are really, really important examples and like things to think about when we try to build pre-service and in-service education for our teachers related to these issues. And I really think that it is especially important.
Yeah, and I would just highlight that I think in many ways in the US, we've taken the wrong lesson from what's been effective in Finland and other countries like Singapore. So, the US, we basically look at Finland and Singapore and we use that as evidence that supports the basic idea that we just need to get the best and the brightest teachers into teaching and let them go. And that somehow on their own, they are going to figure out how to create more powerful and equitable education. But if you really look and study at what goes on in Finland and Singapore and other countries, teachers are much better prepared in Finland and Singapore than in the US but they're also equipped with much better curricula, much better assessment systems that are more aligned to a consistent and commonly understood set of goals. So I think, the lesson we need to take is that, yes, it's important to have effective and powerful teachers, but that also entails creating the resources and a wide range of supports that will enable them to be successful.
Yes, thank you. And actually now reaching this a bit of the special area that we have lived in, especially in the scale of education, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, that the whole pandemic era and the kind of challenges and also the kind of expectations, how things can be or should be converted to remote world or hybrid style, and the expectations for teachers, but also for students. Yeah, you were, Thomas, mentioning this kind of a niche possibility, which is not anymore so that all the learning has to be linked kind of physically in the school environment and is linked to school environment, but actually the supporting of also additional activities around it. And could you elaborate this one a bit further?
Yes, in terms of, so niche is a possibility. It really builds on the notion that, and this was emphasized in the poll, people talked about the importance of cultural context. And for me, it's not just the cultural context, but it's the very specific conditions in which learning takes place that we need to take advantage of. So rather than developing one general approach to personalized education or to promote social emotional development, we need to be developing very specific supports and activities that take advantage of the conditions in which children are living and learning, and create supports within those contexts that help them to learn what we think is important. So going back to the question of the male migrant working class students, it's thinking about what are the opportunities in their environment, in school and outside of school, in their parents' workplaces, in their homes, in the virtual world, as Jonathan's question alludes to, where they can learn in ways that will allow them to take advantage of their strengths, build on those, and learn and develop the capacities that we care about. So when I talk about niche as a possibility, I'm really talking about where do we find the conditions that are going to allow us to create the education that we think is much more powerful, whether it's online, offline, in school, out of school. In Finland, in the US, in the desert, wherever it might be.
Yes, thank you. And actually, you mentioned Jonathan, so we actually have a couple of students from our Changing Education, a master's degree program here with us, and we have been discussing this topic with them and kind of finding out the student viewpoints. Maybe I would ask actually at this point, when putting our thoughts to this pandemic era, and perhaps has it challenged the education as a system, but also in practice, Jonathan, you could actually open your microphone and share with us the thoughts and the question that you had in mind, particularly.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jonathan. I was a teacher in Baltimore County for the past 3 years before moving to Finland to be part of the Changing Education program. My question, just to kind of go further on, is what are your views on the future of virtual learning in the classroom, and is it sustainable for the teachers as well as the students of the post-pandemic world? Seeing that we have a lot of teachers who may have started teaching in an era when there was not a lot of technology, and then also even for the students making the adjustments, even maybe what they're experiencing at home, maybe taking care of their younger siblings, etc. But my question is again, what are your views on the future of virtual learning in the classroom, and is it sustainable for the teachers and students of the post-pandemic world?
Thank you, Jonathan. Auli, do you like to start?
Yes, we have been thinking about and discussing about this quite a lot, both with teachers in primary primary school and also teachers in higher education. And I think that this time has really challenged us to think about that what is the meaning of teaching and interaction in the classroom, and what are the things, and in what kind of activities do we need, and for what kind of goals do we need this interaction in the classroom, and what are the things that are best done online. I think that, and my opinion is that, of course, we will go back to classrooms as soon as we can, so that we don't, I think that we will never have this broad online teaching as we have at the moment. But especially with the older students and students in higher education, I think that this will increase our blended learning designs, blended courses, so that we as teachers are required, and our students especially challenge us to think that what do we need to do together in the classroom interaction, what they can do on their own, what we can do online. So my thinking at the moment is that we definitely need face-to-face classroom interaction with each other, but we probably have more blended designs in our teaching.
Yeah, and I would just add, I'll be interested, Jonathan, in your own perspective on this, given what you've been living through as well. But I think part of the problem is the question is, and you didn't frame it this way, but I think policymakers and others often think about, well, should learning be in person or should it be online? And the reality, I think, just as Auli was saying, is I think we have an opportunity to try to figure out which one works the best for which goals under which circumstances. So again, it's about trying to take advantage of the opportunities in online learning that may not be there in face-to-face, but without losing the advantages of face-to-face. So just to give you one example, we had some, working particularly with high school students, we had teachers who found that when they were teaching online, that because students started using the chat feature, they would message teachers directly with questions and concerns, often about their own personal lives, that teachers would never hear about in a large classroom setting. That was a tremendous opportunity. We had one high school where the teachers actually found out that kids were not getting enough to eat. They weren't getting their school meals and they were unhealthy. And the school was actually able to build on that knowledge and build a connection and address that problem. But when they went back in person, teachers lost that avenue of communication. So the question is, how do we go back in person, but then create those lines of communication that that the virtual world can really make possible?
Thank you, and thank you once more, Jonathan, for a very good question. And that is actually a very interesting point you pointed out here at last. So kind of, it's not only about the socioeconomic kind of questions, bringing them to the discussion of education development, but it's also that there are pros and cons in technology in many ways. And I actually think that we had one question a bit related to this socioeconomic matter from Samantha. So I would like to ask Samantha, could you open your mic at this point, and it's your turn.
Yeah, so I dropped my question in the chat section, but I'm a special education teacher, high school level, coming from High Tech High International in San Diego, California, where I was for 7 years. And this year during the pandemic, I held a bi-monthly parent meeting. And so this was the question I got the most, was about the appropriate amount of screen time and if there's any lasting effects or what parents should be concerned with, because not only was the student online for classes, but they were also online for socialization because of quarantine. So yes, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, well, as a parent of a now senior high school, a 17-year-old girl who last year literally, would, wake up in the morning, sit in her bed, get out her computer, and stare at the screen for the next 7 hours as her teachers, has her regular school schedule rolled out. I absolutely share those concerns. And I just want to highlight that what you call Zoom school, basically what happened in many places in the US and certainly other parts of the world was people just transferred what was supposed to happen during the regular school day in person online, because we have this conception that that's what learning and schooling is. And that's a disaster. It fails to take into account the possibilities that we were just talking about in terms of online learning or ways to take advantage of the challenges and possibilities. So that's a huge problem. And I think there is some evidence. I just saw a recent study. I can try to pull it out if you're interested, from the American Medical Association, that showed that there's been increased screen time during the pandemic and then beyond. But my concern is not that kids are online playing games. It's that we had them 7 hours in school in ways that was totally inefficient and unproductive and unhealthy, and that we need to challenge that and figure out how to do it more effectively. And I would say, and a shout out to High Tech High, which I see as one of those niches of possibility where they're really demonstrating new ways of learning and more powerful learning that we could all take advantage of.
Thank you. I would love it if you could share the article.
I'll look for it.
Yes, thank you. Auli, any thoughts on that topic?
Yes, I was also about to mention that you maybe have seen the articles related to Zoom fatigue that have been published because the COVID only continues and continues, and also the function that some students have felt as a relief, so that they can hide their own video from the school Zoom when discussing with others and joining the Zoom teaching. So I think that these are the clear effects that how stressful this can be for a long time.
How do you actually see, because earlier there was a mention from you that both Rich, that it's quite much about tools. It was more discussion that, I think that Thomas, you mentioned about kind of tools for teachers, but is this the kind of question and whose role it is to have perhaps tools for also adults, kind of the parents of the school pupils or students? How to tackle the challenges that the education perhaps in the future also will bring to us?
Yes, well, I think, so part of the problem is that I think in the US in particular, we failed to develop a common understanding of what it is that needs to happen in school, or how we can support individually and collectively what students are doing. So it's essentially, again, left up to individual teachers like Samantha to develop those relationships with parents every year, a new set of parents, and to negotiate those relationships, and to try to take into account the fact that parents may be bringing a whole wide range of different expectations and beliefs about education, particularly in the US, where there isn't really any common understanding of what the purpose of school or education might be. I think, again, one of the lessons we can take from places like Singapore and Finland is that we need to create the mechanisms so that parents and those outside of schools have a better understanding of what's happening inside schools, and that in turn can provide a better foundation for those parent-teacher relationships, school community relationships, and then figuring out how we can work together to support education. That's not to say that there aren't issues with that in Finland and Singapore. But at least, I think there's some lessons we can learn there. I would just add that in Singapore, parents get homework. right? The teachers literally will send home homework packets with kids with instructions for how the parents and what the parents should do to help. I'm not necessarily suggesting that's the direction to go, but it illustrates the differences.
That is an innovative approach. Let's put it like this. Yeah. Kelly actually there in this chat has asked one question, and also noticed that Kelly noticed in Finland when researching Finnish education that in Finland it was done a fantastic job of making vocational and technical training opportunities equally valid as university pathways. And the question was, I think it's more now directed for you, Thomas, like how can we do the same thing in the US? This would be a great way to provide equitable pathways.
I actually thought it was directed to Auli because Finland, this is an area where we need to learn from Finland. But I would just go back and say, part of it goes back to the creating the resources and pathways in the US. We do have some very strong career and technical pathways in the US that we could expand, but part of that is limited by the conception and the reality that those career and technical tracks have been turned into lower level tracks. So they are not conceived of, created, nor treated as equal to a university education. They are created as if it is, it's not for a professional education and not a support. It's what you do if you can't get into college. So we have to confront that expectation as well. And part of that is to create a much more robust and powerful lifelong learning approach that supports the transition into careers where people can make a really good living.
Yes.
Yes, if I can continue, this was really good question, Kelly. And this is actually one of the examples taken from Finnish educational system, so that although we have different pathways and educational trajectories, so we don't have that kind of dead ends, so to say, that although you at some point choose to go to certain route, you can change it. Depending on your interest, depending on your personal situation, depending on what you think that you would like to go for. So this is really, and I have been actually thinking, and I don't know that why we have this kind of opportunity in our system. Maybe it is related to this equity and equality thing, and thinking and willingness to promote it, but also to the fact that Finland is so small country, so that we need to provide the opportunities for all in a variety of ways.
Thank you, and thank you, Kelly, for the very good lift up there. We actually have a bit more time for our discussion, and I would like to relate the kind of my actual final discussion topic for you, Auli and Thomas, a bit to the university research, the role and the value it has or maybe hasn't got right now. How do you see when we talk about education development, is the university research kind of the role understood? And also, for example, in Association of American Universities, it has pointed out that there needs to be more understanding and also kind of cooperation, also in the US context. So the basics are known and they are good things, but at the same time, there are things that need to be strengthened. So how do you see, is the university research valued? And on the other hand, do we have enough cooperation? Are there some partners that we would still need to have and find? Which one maybe would Thomas would like to start?
Again, I was really hoping Auli would answer that question, because again, I think that is an arena which is handled much better in Finland, Singapore, many other countries and higher performing systems. Again, it goes back to the notion that there's a real effort to develop that common understanding at a policy level of what's important in a system. Finland, the assessment approach that Finland takes in terms of the national, matrix exam is designed to generate information that helps everyone to reflect on the progress in the system and identify problems and think about where the system is headed. And that can help create a better foundation for collaboration and coordination between research and schools. And we just don't have that in the US. Once again, this is a society that values individuals and autonomy. And so the idea is that every researcher essentially in every university is on their own to figure out how to make those connections. And some have done it better than others. We do have some good examples of kind of research practice partnerships, but those that I'm involved in a sense, I've really tried to turn them around so that they're practice research partnerships. I think too often they're research practice partnerships in the sense that we develop research findings that we then try to figure out how to get into practice. Whereas the way I see it, we need to identify what the challenges and problems are that people face in practice, and then bring our research expertise and our tools and our methods to help address those issues. And so that's what I'm working on. Others are working on that in the US as well, but I think we have a long way to go.
Yes, I was about to say that from my perspective, both in basic education and in higher education, the attitude in Finland towards utilizing research in the developments and in changing something is quite positive. Of course, we also have all kinds of teachers who are interested or are not at all interested, or policymakers, but still I think that the general or the major or the general attitude is really positive. And I think that what is interesting and important to say is that I perceive the use of research in various levels. So our teachers are interested in the latest research results or applications, pedagogical things and innovations that researchers have developed or they have developed together with researchers. They are interested in collaborating and developing things together as a part of their own schoolwork and teaching and learning in their classrooms and in schools. Also our policymakers and administration who are responsible of curriculum work and national co-curriculum that is done every 10th year. They are interested, they follow research and current research findings, and also in the ministry. They are just a couple of days ago, Jari Lavonen, who is the chair of the teacher forum for teachers or teacher education forum, was asking about some details and some presentations to some of their events. So it is quite constant discussion with researchers and policymakers and practitioners and use of research results.
Thank you so much. And I think that this is the discussion that we could have continued for a longer period of time with all of you, and also for our future researchers and decision makers, Jonathan, Samantha, and the others. So you are also in a key role. I see there is a hand. If you could, Ashamaki, perhaps write the comment or question in the chat, as we are kind of running out of time. So we only have a few minutes ago. So if I can see a proper question in the chat, we can then see if we are able to still have it. I would like to still thank you, first of all. Thank you for the activity, for the participants, but thank you so much, Auli and Thomas. And we would like to continue this discussion on the important topic in the future in our USA Alumni and Friends network, and also more widely in the international concept in our work, because the whole topic is very close to the heart of University of Helsinki, but also here in our Helsinki alumni team that works with our alumni and other stakeholders. And if there are any additional comments, you can write them still to chat. We will further them to our speakers and then get back to you. You would get a nice topic ideas, some viewpoints, and perhaps some links, as Thomas has now put the links of that one article here in the chat you can already reach. But thank you, and I would like to give the stage for Adam for a little while still.
Thanks so much, Tina. So yes, I think this very much kind of concludes today's event. So once again, on behalf of the university, I'd like to thank all of our speakers and event partners, the Finnish Embassy in Washington, DC, and the Fulbright Finland Foundation. And of course, to all of you in the US for participating and joining and taking part in the discussion. As I mentioned at the beginning, this event, we hope, will be the first of many that we'll be organising in the US for our alumni and friends network. So we very much look forward to seeing you again and hopefully face-to-face in the years to come. So if you have any further questions or you have ideas for how we can develop our US alumni and friends network, please do get in touch with us. Our email address is still at the top of the chat from the beginning of the event. Just to let you know that you'll also receive from us very shortly a short feedback form, an email about the opportunities that were mentioned in today's event. And finally, as I said, we'll do our best to publish a recording of today's event as soon as possible. So thank you again for joining us. On behalf of the University of Helsinki, to wish you all the very best for the fast approaching holiday season and Thanksgiving. So thanks so much and have a good day.